Nothing in this podcast is intended as investment advice, and the people in this podcast may hold positions in the stocks they talk about. Do not buy any investment based solely on a tip or recommendation. Please do your own research.
Hello and welcome to the Midweek Takeaway. Today we're joined by Sapan Ghai, Chief Commercial Officer of Sovereign Metals. Welcome back, Sapan. How's life treating you?
Yeah, very well. Markets could be better, Phil, but but life in general is okay.
Well, we've just obviously heard the news that a leading global market position beckons for Kasiya's low-cost flake graphite co-product. Do you want to tell us just how significant this news is for the company?
Yeah, thanks for that. Look, we announced a mineral resource estimate on Kasiya a few months ago, which basically told us that on a co-product basis, Kasiya is the second largest graphite deposit in the world, or flake graphite deposit in the world. Why is that important to us sitting around in developed nations? Well, a lot of demand for graphite, especially flake graphite, and the types of sizes that we have of graphite and the specs that we have, is coming from the lithium-ion battery space. So, and that obviously is completely entwined with the electric vehicles sector, and the push for lowering the impact of climate change. So basically, rewind back to Kasiya. What we're looking at here is a project that could supply worldwide, in fact, because of the infrastructure available to us. A graphite which ultimately ends up in your Tesla, in your Nissan Leaf, in any of those electric vehicles that will be around in a few years.
I mean, one thing I took home from reading the RNS was that from an ESG point of view, the news was very encouraging. So looking at, I think it was each ton of graphite produced from Kasiya is expected to have a global warming potential of about 0.2 tons of CO2 emission, which I think you said represents 5 times less greenhouse gas than compared to the natural graphite produced in China. So basically what I took home is that the carbon footprint is significantly lower than peers.
Yeah, look, I've always said this, there's no point in us going, gung-ho trying to change the world by buying electric vehicles when the components of those vehicles are in themselves put together in a very high carbon intensive way, right? So one of the first things that we did once we knew that there was graphite within Kasiya was to understand if we were to produce it on the basis of the assumptions and parameters of our scoping study, which was announced in December 2021, what would be the carbon footprint of producing a ton of this graphite? And what we found was that would be that footprint would be about 0.2 tons of carbon dioxide emissions equivalent. The same number for a ton of natural graphite coming out of China today is 1.1 tons. So yes, there's your 5 times lower carbon footprint. What's interesting is because of the demand for graphite, one of the big markets for China is actually synthetic graphite. So there's not enough of this natural graphite on the earth. So we need to produce it in another way. That's the Chinese thought. And so what they produce is this thing called synthetic graphite, which is essentially without going into chemistry, it's essentially realigning the components of coal within a very high carbon intensive way. And in fact, what we found during our research was that Chinese synthetic graphite has a global warming potential for each ton of it produced of 20.6 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. So what I'm saying is Kasiya's natural graphite is about 1% of the global warming potential of synthetic graphite, which ends up in your electric vehicles today.
This sounds like one of those commercials where we say, make sure you use natural products instead of synthetic products because you will live longer because of this. No, but basically 100 times more pollutant, if that's the right word, than if we dig this stuff up naturally out of the ground. Now, the reality from what you're saying, I'm assuming, is that this synthetic type of graphite is going to happen anyway, because there isn't enough of the stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sorry, Kevin. So
Yeah.
we're not saying we are going to replace all the synthetic graphite in the world with natural graphite. That's just not going to happen because we just don't have enough graphite for the forecast demand of electric vehicles in the future. But what we can say is, if we were to shift some of that synthetic graphite market, and even the Chinese natural graphite market, into producing in projects such as Kasiya, you could basically lower the global warming potential of producing a lithium-ion battery that then ends up in your electric vehicle.
Yeah, which is good because obviously I think the world's got ahead of itself in terms of all of these things, because basically we think, yeah, we all drive electric cars and the planet will be greener. But actually, if we don't mine all of these things, whether it be graphite, metal, or all the metals involved, even the metallurgical coal required with the iron ore required for the steel that goes into all of these things, then basically we're making the planet worse before we make it better.
We tried to build in that whole sustainability component into Kasiya right from day dot, because we knew for a start the graphite that we have at Kasiya, in fact, the whole of Kasiya is not a hard rock project, right? So there's no drilling and blasting of materials that then need to be crushed and ground down into something that can be processed. It's within a very soft, friable material. So basically, what I'm saying is, Mother Nature has already,
done the business,
done all of that for us. So all we're doing is digging it up and processing it. So that's number one. Number two, when we were looking at the actual, for example, the power that goes into processing the material, both for the rutile and graphite at Kasiya, we built in the fact that the Malawi grid power is hydro power. So that in itself means that we have a lower carbon footprint. But of course, it is Malawi. We know that power isn't going to be available, 24/7, plug and play all the time. So we've actually built in a solar power component to the project as well. In fact, I think about 60% of our power will be coming from a solar farm that will be built just over the fence from our plant.
The whole market with graphite is slightly different than a lot of these battery metals, because ultimately you're going to be selling straight to the end user in most cases. I would imagine it's not like at the minute anyway there is a graphite market. You are basically selling to the end user. So how do you look at that from the point of view of who is likely to be the off taker, who's going to take this stuff?
Yeah, so I think the question is basically, how does this graphite end up in your car essentially, and what are those parties in between to get it there, right? So our graphite is a flake that will be produced at Kasiya, will be a flake concentrate. What then happens in order to get it ending up in a battery is it needs to be purified and it needs to be spheronized, which basically means turning those flakes in on one another until they form tiny little spheres that then are laid out and form the anode within a lithium-ion battery. And all of that is a very chemistry intensive process, which, ultimately we're a bunch of miners, right? And explorers, developers, geologists, mining engineers. That's something that currently is outside of our remit. We may think about bringing in the expertise at some point, but essentially we would look to be selling this graphite concentrate down the road to someone who can then turn it into an anode product. And those guys will essentially sell that as a battery component to gigafactories or other car manufacturers if they've moved upstream into that.
And one question regarding I think you talked about the flake size distribution. There was a comment on that. So I think basically that it puts you in something like ranking in the top half of the global projects based on that the specifications. Does that mean that from an offtake partner or an offtaker, they would look at Kasiya as being favourable in terms of the different sizes that it represents?
What the flake size distribution tells us is that our graphite can be used in a whole spectrum of different end uses,
sure.
which is great for us because it means that we're not completely attuned to just one end use, for example, lithium-ion batteries.
Yeah.
But it does say that a certain bulk of our graphite can be placed into that industry. The other graphite can be used for, all the usual other uses of graphite within, industrial applications and consumer applications, lubricants, fire retardant material, all that kind of good stuff, and even pencils, Kevin, as you've mentioned in the past. But look, for us, it was important to do that because we wanted to understand exactly what type of graphite we have and who our potential off-takers would therefore be for us to start those discussions.
So who would those potential off-takers be? Give us a few names.
Oh, look,
I mean, obviously not, yes, it's going to be them, but what type of companies are we talking about?
We wouldn't be doing our job if we hadn't signed a number of NDAs with a number of potential off-takers, but anyone from your commodity traders through to end users of the graphite project. You can probably hazard a guess in terms of who those types of players are, but we're in discussions with a number of them.
Okay, so you've got NDAs signed, and these are all things in discussion about what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay, but the interesting part of sovereign metals in general is that this is the second string to the bow because this is a rutile deposit.
That's right.
Ultimately,
it is. It's nice having the graphite there because what it means is we basically just tag on a graphite concentrator plant, which is, based on our initial scoping study, was only 10% of our capex, but it threw out about 30% of our MPV. So, so you can see why having the graphite there is valuable. We were going to dig it up anyway, and instead of putting the graphite aside in a semi-concentrated fashion, why not just produce it?
And I'll hasten to add that you nonchalantly say about rutile, but it's not just any old rutile deposit, it's the world's largest rutile deposit as well. I mean, talk about bragging rights down the pub.
Look, yeah, we're very, very lucky to have basically tripped over, as you said, the largest rutile deposit in the world, and that's what Kasiya, primarily is. And again, just like the graphite, we did our work in terms of what would it mean for global warming potential, CO2 emissions if we were to produce the rutile out of Kasiya versus some of the substitute projects or products or alternative products out there in the market, such as synthetic rutile. And what we found is, again, we're lowest carbon footprint. So
in terms of like not forward-looking statements, but in terms of a roadmap for investors and potential investors, the other thing that they can look forward to is the updated scoping study for Kasiya, which I think is on track and due for completion shortly.
Yep. Look, we've been for some time we've been guiding the market that that should be out mid-year. We're mid-June right now, so you can hazard a guess as to when that should be popping up on your screens.
Yeah, and I mean all this takes place in a pretty safe jurisdiction in Malawi. Malawi's a democratic country in Africa, and really not much bad happens in Malawi. Basically, it's a pretty small place. So have you any comment on where it is?
Malawi is a great place to have this project on it for a number of reasons. Malawi is part of the Commonwealth. It's a former British colony, so basically it ends up using English common law, and so we're very, very au fait with that kind of part of the system. It is a total democracy. In fact, back in 2020, they had an election and the result was contested by a number of parties. So all they did was rerun the election. The results came out.
The election until they get the result they want.
Well, look, they actually just reran it. Every party was again happy with it. It was an alternative. It was a different outcome, funnily enough, but everyone understood that this is the way democracy works, and what it actually meant for the country was some great publicity because the Economist magazine named them Country of the Year for 2020. They said that during the pandemic, 80 countries around the world grew politically riskier, and Malawi was the only country in the world during the pandemic that actually decreased its political risk, because it showed the rest of the world how you deal with questions around elections and all the rest of it. You know, no one was trying to start a coup or trying to trying to start an insurrection on the Capitol building. No one's marching down the streets talking about rerunning any referendums or anything like that. It was just the result is what it is, and everyone took it.
Yeah, and the scenario is that Malawi as a country is going to be benefited by this project in a big way. I would imagine it's going to be probably quite a large proportion of the GDP if this all happens.
Yeah, massively. Look, we're one of a handful of companies in Malawi, and we're very, very aware that we have quite a big social responsibility on our shoulders. We actually put out an RNS of some of our initiatives that we've been doing in the country a few weeks ago. And that includes trying to bolster education by upgrading some of the schools around the Kasiya project. We've started a scholarship program for high school students. We are trying to deliver drinkable water to the villages by building water bores. So there's big water pumps that you see in villages. So these guys don't have to, travel for ages and spend time having to find that drinkable water from other faraway sources. Yeah, we're doing a lot with the community. We have community liaison officers who are always talking to the locals, getting them to understand what we're doing there, rather than just kind of getting on with life and not interacting with the locals, which is not the way that you do business. Yeah, so we're ensuring we're a very, very amicable social player within Malawi itself. And look, when the project comes online, Malawi's tax rate is 30%. So that will, given the size of this project, even on the back of the initial scoping study numbers, you can imagine just how much that means for the GDP of a country which gets most of its gets a fair whack of its funds from overseas aid.
Thank you for your time, Sapan.
Sapan Ghai, Chief Commercial Officer at Sovereign Metals. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, guys.
This podcast was brought to you by Roast PR Limited. If you would like to appear on a future episode of The Sunday Roast, please email admin@thesundayroast.net.